The Smithsonian Institution, an unveiling of its shadowed dimensions are the enigmatic bequest, foundations of an American institution to James Smithson's legacy, noble intent or veiled purpose? The genesis of the Smithsonian Institution is inextricably linked to the curious and enduringly mysterious figure of James Smithson, a British scientist of considerable repute. In an act that continues to fuel speculation, Smithson, who never set foot on American soil, bequeathed his entire fortune, a sum exceeding $500,000 upon its delivery to the Philadelphia Mint in 1838, converted from over 100,000 gold sovereigns, to the United States. His directive was to establish at Washington, under the name of the Smithsonian Institution, an establishment for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. The very breadth and apparent altruism of this mission statement stand in stark contrast to the opacity of Smithson's personal motivations. He confided in no friends or colleagues about his grand philanthropic gesture, leaving posterity to ponder the true wellspring of this monumental gift. Was it the act of a man embittered by the denial of his paternal legacy, seeking posthumous recognition on a grand scale? Or perhaps he was genuinely inspired by the burgeoning American democratic experiment, or by the Enlightenment ideals embodied in scientific societies like the Royal Institution. The official chronicles of the Smithsonian itself concede that we are left to speculate on the ideals and motivations of a gift that has had such significant impact. This foundational ambiguity, the lack of a definitive, unassailable motive from the benefactor himself, created an interpretive space. If the wellspring of the institution is clouded, its subsequent trajectory in the interpretation of its core mission, the increase and diffusion of knowledge, could be, and arguably have been, susceptible to the agendas and ideologies of those who came to steward his legacy. The physical internment of Smithson's remains within the crypt in the Smithsonian Castle serves as a constant, tangible reminder of this enigmatic origin, a silent testament to a purpose that remains, in its deepest sense, unspoken. The sheer magnitude of the bequest from a foreign national to a young, and in some respects, rival nation, inherently invites questions about potential unstated expectations or more complex, perhaps even personal or geopolitical, currents that may have underpinned this unprecedented act of philanthropy. The early debates and the forging of a national identity and its discontents. The path from Smithson's bequest to the Smithsonian's establishment on August 10, 1836, was neither swift nor smooth. It was paved with a decade of impassioned and often acrimonious debate within the halls of the U.S. Congress. This period of intense deliberation revealed deep fissures in the American political landscape concerning the very nature of the young republic, its sovereignty, and the appropriate role of the federal government. The proposal to accept a foreign endowment for a national institution sparked a political firestorm, drawing in states' rights advocates, nationalists, federalists, Anglophobes, xenophobes, and others who disagreed over the possible repercussions. Prominent figures voiced strenuous objections. Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, a staunch defender of states' rights, contended that Congress possessed no constitutional authority to accept such a gift and, furthermore, that it was beneath dignity to accept presents from anyone. Senator William Campbell Preston, also of South Carolina, initially decried the bequest, fearing it would set a precedent where every whippersnapper vagabond might think it proper to have his name distinguished in the same way. Even President Andrew Jackson, while ultimately urging acceptance, harbored initial uncertainties regarding his constitutional power to do so. Against this tide of opposition, figures like former President and then Congressman John Quincy Adams championed the cause, advocating that the funds be directed towards scientific research. The eventual establishment of the Smithsonian Institution marked a significant moment in the cultural development of the United States. It became, as its official history notes, part of the process of developing an American national identity, and identity rooted in exploration, innovation, and a unique American style. This explicit linkage to nation-building, however, meant that the institution was, from its very inception, positioned on contested ground. The early political fractures surrounding its acceptance were not merely procedural hurdles but fundamental disagreements about national self-definition and the legitimate scope of federal power. These initial discontents foreshadowed the Smithsonian's enduring role as an arena where competing visions of America, its history, and its values would be fought. The very mission to increase and diffusion of knowledge, articulated by Smithson, became a contested space. The decade-long debate was not just about whether to accept the funds, but implicitly about what kind of institution it would be and, therefore, what kind of knowledge it would privilege and disseminate. The first secretary, Joseph Henry, favored a focus on scientific research, warning that a primary emphasis on museum collections would squander resources and, critically, render the institution liable to be brought under direct political influence. This warning proved remarkably prescient, as the Smithsonian evolved into the world's largest museum complex, continually navigating the very political pressures Henry foresaw. The lack of a sharply defined operational mandate in Smithson's will, beyond his broad philanthropic aim, created a persistent vulnerability, allowing its purpose and direction to be shaped and reshaped by internal priorities and powerful external forces. 2. Cracks in the Ivory Tower, a history of Smithsonian controversies. The Smithsonian Institution, despite its esteemed position as a guardian of knowledge and culture, has a history punctuated by intense controversies that have laid bare the complex interplay of scholarly pursuits, public sensitivities, political pressures, and ethical considerations. These episodes reveal an institution grappling with its role in shaping national narratives and the inherent challenges of its unique public-private structure. The politics of display, battles over truth, representation, and censorship. The Smithsonian's exhibition halls have frequently become battlegrounds where differing interpretations of history, art, and culture collide, often leading to accusations of bias, censorship, and the imposition of specific ideological viewpoints. One of the most defining and damaging controversies was the planned 1994 to 1995 exhibition at the National Air and Space Museum, centered on the Enola Gay, the B-29 bomber that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Intended to mark the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, the exhibit sought to explore the complex legacy of the atomic bombings. However, initial scripts and concepts ignited a firestorm of criticism, particularly from veterans organizations and members of Congress, who felt the narrative was overly sympathetic to Japanese perspectives, questioned the strategic and moral necessity of the bombings, and failed to adequately honor American sacrifices. The dispute exposed what one analysis termed a stark contrast between how historians operate and the way most Americans view the past. After multiple rewrites, intense public debate, and significant political pressure, including direct threats to the Smithsonian's congressional appropriations, the exhibition was drastically curtailed. The most contentious interpretive elements were removed, and the display was reduced largely to the fuselage of the restored aircraft with minimal historical context. The director of NISM, Martin Harwood, ultimately resigned in the fallout. The Enola Gay affair became a landmark case in the culture wars of the 1990s, demonstrating the Smithsonian's acute vulnerability when its scholarly interpretations clashed with deeply held public memories and powerful political interests. The Smithsonian's own statement accompanying the revised, scaled-down exhibit, suggesting it had misjudged the needs and desires of its visitors, was seen by some as a capitulation to external pressures. A similar dynamic of political pressure leading to content alteration occurred with the 2010 to 2011 exhibition Hide-Seek, Difference and Desire in American Portraiture at the National Portrait Gallery. This groundbreaking exhibition was the first major museum show to explore the influence of gay and lesbian artists and same-sex intimacy in American portraiture. Controversy erupted over a 4-minute video excerpt by artist David Wojnarowicz, A Fire in My Belly, which included a brief scene of ants crawling on a crucifix. Following complaints from the Catholic League and pressure from conservative politicians, including then House Speaker John Boehner and Majority Leader Eric Cantor, who threatened to zero out the Smithsonian's budget, Smithsonian Secretary G. Wayne Clow ordered the removal of the video. This decision was widely condemned by art and civil liberties groups as an act of censorship, driven by homophobia thinly veiled as religious offense. The incident underscored the Smithsonian's susceptibility to financial coercion when faced with ideologically charged objections to its content. The influence of private donors also became a focal point of controversy in 2015 with the National Museum of African Art's exhibition Conversations, African and African American Artworks in Dialogue. A significant portion of the exhibited works, 1/3, was drawn from the private collection of Bill and Camille Cosby. Furthermore, the Cosbys had contributed $716,000 to assist with the cost of the exhibition, which was also, in part, about Bill Cosby's own fame and geniality. At the time, Bill Cosby was facing a cascade of sexual assault allegations. Critics argued that the exhibition, given its timing and funding, appeared to celebrate a figure mired in profound scandal. Unlike the Hide-Seek situation, the museum's director, Johnetta Cole, who was a close friend of the Cosbys, decided that the show must go on, stating a preference for this course over pulling the exhibit and thereby harming the other artists whose work was included and who bore no responsibility for Cosby's behavior. A disclaimer was eventually added outside the exhibit stating that the Smithsonian in no way condones the behavior Cosby was accused of. This case illustrates a different institutional response to controversy, perhaps influenced by the nature of the donor relationship and the specific curatorial commitments already made. The Trump administration era, roughly 2017 to 2021 and 2025 onwards, based on snippet dating, brought a new level of direct executive pressure on the Smithsonian's curatorial independence. An executive order issued March 27, 2025, titled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, explicitly targeted the Smithsonian, accusing it and other cultural institutions of promoting a divisive, race-centered ideology and anti-American ideology that allegedly degrade shared American values and portray American history and Western values as inherently harmful and oppressive. Specific exhibitions, such as The Shape of Power, Stories of Race in American Sculpture at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, which explores how race has been used to establish power systems and how sculpture promoted scientific racism, were singled out for criticism. The National Museum of African American History and Culture, NAAT, was chastised for its Talking About Race online portal, which included a graphic, later removed after conservative complaints, that listed concepts like hard work, individualism, and the nuclear family as aspects of white culture. Plans for the forthcoming Smithsonian American Women's History Museum to celebrate transgender athletes were also condemned. These executive actions directed that federal funding be withheld from programs deemed ideologically inconsistent with administration policy and called for the removal or revision of such content. Smithsonian leadership, including Secretary Lonnie Bunch, responded by affirming the institution's commitment to nonpartisanship, scholarly accuracy, and the presentation of multifaceted American stories, including painful ones, while also acknowledging the need to learn and adjust when errors are made. Reports also surfaced about the potential removal of artifacts from the Ma'at, though the Smithsonian attributed these to standard museum rotation and loan agreement practices rather than the executive order. Other notable instances of contention include a 1978 lawsuit against the National Museum of Natural History over an evolution exhibit, which plaintiffs argued violated religious neutrality by presenting evolution as the only credible theory of the origin of life. The court dismissed the case, upholding the museum's statutory authority. In 1991, the exhibition The West as America at the then National Museum of American Art was criticized by conservatives for its portrayal of westward expansion as a narrative of conquest and destruction. More recently, in 2023, the National Air and Space Museum faced accusations of disrespecting a group of pro-life students. There are also ongoing critiques regarding the alleged censorship or misrepresentation of queer themes in the work of artists like Felix Gonzalez Torres, specifically concerning the memorial aspects of his work related to his partner and the AIDS crisis. These varied episodes reveal a recurring pattern. The Smithsonian plans or mounts an exhibition that touches upon sensitive or contested aspects of history, science, or culture. This often triggers public or political backlash, frequently accompanied by threats to its substantial federal funding. The institution's response then ranges from capitulation and content alteration, as with the Enola Gay and the Hide-Seek video, to attempts at nuanced defense or standing firm, as with the Cosby Collection, or responses to Trump-era executive orders. This controversy cycle underscores an enduring tension. The Smithsonian, as a research institution, often seeks to present complex, revised, or critical interpretations of the past, aligning with evolving scholarship. However, significant segments of the public and influential political actors may hold strong attachments to more traditional, commemorative, or patriotic narratives, viewing critical perspectives as unpatriotic, divisive, or an attack on shared American values. The terms divisive and anti-American are often weaponized, applied broadly and vaguely to delegitimize narratives that scrutinize systemic inequalities or the more troubling aspects of national history. The Smithsonian's financial structure, with approximately 53-70% of its operating budget derived from federal appropriations, creates a clear vulnerability. The explicit or implicit threat of budget cuts has historically served as a powerful lever for those seeking to influence or censor the institution's content. This dynamic can foster a chilling effect, potentially leading to institutional self-censorship to avoid politically charged confrontations and protect its financial lifeline. Consequently, many of these exhibition controversies are not merely isolated disagreements, but rather highly visible skirmishes in broader societal culture wars over national identity, historical memory, and social values. The Smithsonian, by its very nature and prominence, inevitably becomes a central arena for these ongoing struggles. Table 1, Chronology of Major Smithsonian Exhibition Controversies. Pipe controversy. Name focus. Pipe years. Pipe museums involved. Pipe core issues. Pipe outcome. Pipe key document hides. Pipe dash 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 pipe. Pipe evolution exhibit. Pipe 1978. Pipe National Museum of Natural History. NMNH. Pipe allegations of violating religious neutrality by presenting evolution as the only credible theory of life's origin. Pipe lawsuit dismissed by court. Exhibit found within museum's statutory authority. Pipe The West as America. Pipe 1991. Pipe National Museum of American Art. Now some. Pipe conservative criticism of portraying Western expansion as conquest and destruction, and ideological assault. Pipe exhibit proceeded. High attendance despite controversy. Pipe Enola Gay exhibit. Pipe 1994 to 1995. Pipe National Air and Space Museum. NISM. Pipe perceived portrayal of Japanese as victims. Questioning of morality. Necessity of atomic bombing. Clash between historical scholarship and veteran public memory. Pipe exhibit drastically scaled down after intense political pressure and budget threats. NISM director resigned. Pipe Hide-Seek, Difference and Desire in American Portraiture. Pipe 2010 to 2011. Pipe National Portrait Gallery. NPG. Pipe conservative religious objections to a video by David Wojnarowicz depicting ants on a crucifix, within an exhibit on LGBTQ+ themes. Pipe video removed after political pressure and threats to Smithsonian's budget. Widespread accusations of censorship. Pipe Bill Cosby Collection. Conversations exhibit. Pipe C. 2015 Pipe National Museum of African Art MAFA Pipe exhibit featured art from Bill Cosby's collection. Cosby's also donated $716K amidst numerous sexual assault allegations against him, perceived as celebrating Cosby. Pipe exhibit continued with a disclaimer stating Smithsonian did not condone alleged behavior. Decision made to avoid harming other artists. Pipe Trump administration executive orders and criticisms. Pipe 2020 to 2025 Pipe multiple Smithsonian museums. Pipe accusations of promoting divisive, race-centered ideology, anti-American narratives. Criticism of content on race, white culture, trans athletes. Threats to defund non-compliant exhibits programs. Pipe Smithsonian leadership affirmed commitment to nonpartisanship and scholarly accuracy while acknowledging need to learn. Some content, for example, white culture, graphic, removed after initial complaints. Ongoing pressure. Pipe Felix Gonzalez Torres artwork interpretation. Pipe ongoing. Pipe implied Smithsonian and other institutions. Pipe allegations of censoring, misrepresenting queer and AIDS-related context of the artist's work, particularly memorials. Pipe ongoing critique from art historians and activists. Pipe B. The Shadow Collection, Unethical Acquisitions, and the Burden of Human Remains. One of the most profound and enduring ethical challenges confronting the Smithsonian Institution lies within its vast collections, specifically the tens of thousands of human remains and culturally sensitive objects acquired over its long history. Many of these acquisitions, particularly those from the 19th and early 20th centuries, were made under circumstances now widely recognized as unethical, rooted in colonial exploitation and discredited scientific theories. A particularly grim chapter involves the so-called racial brain collection, largely the work of Ales Hrdlicka, the Smithsonian's first curator of physical anthropology. Operating in the first half of the 20th century, Hrdlicka was a fervent proponent of scientific racism, seeking to establish a biological basis for racial hierarchies. To this end, he amassed a collection of some 255 human brains, predominantly taken from black individuals, indigenous peoples, and other people of color, often without the knowledge or consent of their families. Some of these remains were sourced from individuals who died at events like the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, where people from various cultures were exhibited in what were essentially human zoos. The Washington Post's investigative series in 2022 to 2023 brought the existence and problematic history of this collection to widespread public attention, revealing that the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History (NMNH) holds at least 30,700 human bones and body parts, many from marginalized communities. In response to these revelations, Smithsonian Secretary Lonnie G. Bunch III issued a formal apology for these unethical past practices and the pain caused by Hrdlicka and others at the institution who acted unethically in the name of science. A Human Remains Task Force was subsequently established in April 2023 to develop new institutional policies for the ethical stewardship and potential return of all human remains in its collections. The task force's January 2024 report emphasized that consent is a vital prerequisite for any future collection or use of human remains and recommended prioritizing the return of remains collected without consent, particularly those from historically marginalized communities. Parallel to the brain collection controversy is the long-standing issue of Native American human remains and funerary objects. The Smithsonian's collections have included the remains of tens of thousands of Native American individuals, many acquired during periods of warfare, forced displacement, and colonial expansion, often as spoils of war. Hrdlicka was also a significant figure in amassing these collections. Recognizing the profound injustice of these holdings, Congress passed the National Museum of the American Indian Act, MIA, in 1989, amended in 1996, which mandates the Smithsonian to inventory, identify the cultural affiliation of, and repatriate Native American human remains and associated funerary objects upon the request of culturally affiliated federally recognized tribes. It is important to note that while the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, of 1990 applies to other federal agencies and museums receiving federal funds, the Smithsonian operates primarily under the distinct, though similar, provisions of the MIA. Despite these legislative mandates, the repatriation process has been criticized as exceedingly slow and fraught with challenges. Over 2 decades after the MIA's enactment, a 2011 Government Accountability Office (GAO) report indicated that only about 1/3 of the estimated Native American human remains in Smithsonian collections had been offered for repatriation. Obstacles cited include the lengthy and resource-intensive nature of inventory and identification processes, the difficulty in establishing clear cultural affiliation for some remains, a lack of resources within tribal communities to undertake reburial, and differing cultural beliefs regarding the handling of ancestral remains. A persistent and contentious issue has been the large number of remains designated as culturally unidentifiable. For many years, the Smithsonian lacked a comprehensive policy for the disposition of these remains. In 2020, the NMNH established a policy allowing tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations to request the return of such remains if a reasonable basis for the request can be demonstrated. The 2024 Human Remains Task Force report also urged the proactive return of these remains. Nevertheless, criticism from Native American communities regarding the pace of repatriation, the perceived bureaucratic hurdles, and the emotional toll of these processes continues. Some Native representatives remain skeptical of the Smithsonian's commitment, despite recent efforts and apologies. The GAO also noted limitations in the oversight provided by the Smithsonian's Repatriation Review Committee, including its lack of jurisdiction over the National Museum of the American Indians' activities and insufficient reporting to Congress. Beyond human remains, the Smithsonian has begun to address the broader ethical implications of its vast collections. In April 2022, the institution adopted a new shared stewardship and ethical returns policy. This landmark policy allows Smithsonian museums to deaccession and return items that, while perhaps legally acquired under the standards of their time, would be considered unethically obtained by contemporary moral and professional standards. This policy explicitly states that ethical considerations can supersede questions of legal ownership and mandates that such inquiries be guided by a modern moral compass. Each Smithsonian museum is empowered to develop its own specific criteria and procedures under this framework, though the Board of Regents retains oversight for items of significant monetary, research, or public interest value. A prominent early application of this policy was the decision to return most of the Smithsonian's collection of Benin bronzes to Nigeria, artifacts looted by British forces in 1897. Other items reportedly under review include ancient pottery from Troy held by the MMH and a photograph of a black jazz musician at the National Museum of American History with provenance concerns. The National Museum of African Art, for instance, is actively developing methodologies for systematic provenance research, prioritizing objects from regions like Benin, Nigeria, Cameroon, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as items of a spiritual or ritual nature or those potentially acquired during periods of conflict. The history of these collections is deeply intertwined with the rise of scientific disciplines like anthropology and archaeology, which themselves were, for a significant period, complicit in and shaped by colonial expansion and pseudoscientific racial theories. The Smithsonian, by providing an institutional platform and resources for figures like Herdlicka, played a role in legitimizing practices that are now condemned. The very act of collecting, cataloging, and displaying human remains and cultural patrimony from marginalized and colonized peoples served to reinforce power imbalances and contribute to the othering of these communities. While the recent policy changes and apologies signal a significant shift towards acknowledging and attempting to redress these historical wrongs, the process is complex and ongoing. The sheer volume of the collections, the decades, and sometimes centuries, that have passed since acquisition, the difficulty in tracing descendants or rightful claimants, and the persistent tension between the scientific desire to study remains and the ethical imperative to return them create an ethical lag. Institutional change often appears to be spurred by external pressures, such as investigative journalism or sustained activism, rather than solely by proactive internal initiative. The new ethical returns framework represents an attempt to bridge the gap between past practices and present values, but its implementation will undoubtedly continue to be a site of negotiation, scrutiny, and potential conflict as the Smithsonian confronts the darker aspects embedded within its own storerooms. The fundamental paradox of a museum's mission to preserve for the future versus the demands of justice for past harms remains a central challenge. Table 2, Status of Smithsonian Human Remains and Ethical Returns. Pipe Category of Remains Items. Pipe Estimated Number in Collection, Approx. Pipe Repatriation Return Status. Pipe Key Policies. Laws Governing Pipe. Current Challenges. Controversies. Pipe Key Document IDs. Pipe Pipe dash 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 Pipe. Pipe Native American Human Remains, Culturally Affiliated. Pipe Part of 18,500 Total Native American Remains. MIA requires inventory. Pipe Ongoing Repatriation. As of 2010, 5,000 offered, 4,330 repatriated. By 2021, greater than 7,000 includes culturally unidentifiable made available repatriated by sea. NMNH offered return of nearly 7,000 indigenous individuals, greater than 4,600 repatriated by 2022 to 2024. Pipe National Museum of the American Indian Act, MIA. Pipe Slow Pace, Resource Intensity, Tribal Capacity, Establishing Affiliation. Pipe Native American Human Remains, Culturally Unidentifiable. Pipe 340 Human Remains, 310 Funerary Objects as of 2010. Constitute majority of items awaiting repatriation under NAGPRA nationally. Pipe historically lacked clear policy. NMNH 2020 policy allows requests with reasonable basis. 2024 Task Force urges proactive return. Pipe MIA indirectly, as part of overall holdings. NMNH policy for culturally unaffiliated human remains, 2020. Pipe difficulty in identifying appropriate claimants. Balancing scientific interest with ethical return. Pipe racial brain collection, Herdlicka. Pipe 255 brains currently held. Part of greater than 30,700 total human remains at NMNH. Pipe vast majority not returned. Only 5 by 2023, including Mary Sarah's. Task Force, 2024, recommends proactive return of non-consensual collections. Pipe no specific law like in mind for these non-Native American remains. Covered by new Smithsonian Human Remains Policy, 2024, and Ethical Returns Policy, 2022. Pipe lack of consent, racist origins of collection, difficulty tracing descendants, lack of legal mandate for non-Native remains prior to new policies. Pipe other non-Native American human remains, not part of brain collection. Pipe part of greater than 30,000 total. Pipe subject to new Human Remains Policy, 2024, and Ethical Returns Policy, 2022. International Repatriation Policy at NMNH since 2015. Pipe Smithsonian Human Remains Policy, 2024. Shared Stewardship and Ethical Returns Policy, 2022. Pipe similar challenges to brain collection, consent, provenance, descendant identification. Pipe culturally sensitive and ethically acquired artifacts, non-human remains. Pipe numbers vast and varied across collections. Pipe subject to Ethical Returns Policy, 2022. Examples: Benin bronzes, most being returned. Turkish pottery, jazz musician photo under review. Pipe Shared Stewardship and Ethical Returns Policy, 2022. Pipe defining unethical by modern standards, complex provenance research, balancing legal ownership with moral claims. Pipe see the price of knowledge, corporate sponsorship, donor influence, and allegations of compromised integrity. The Smithsonian Institution operates under a public-private partnership model, a structure that, while providing vital resources, also opens avenues for potential conflicts of interest and undue influence from benefactors. While federal appropriations constitute a significant portion of its annual budget, variously reported as 53% to 70%, the institution relies heavily on private donations, corporate sponsorships, and its endowment to fund new exhibitions, construct facilities, and undertake ambitious research projects. This financial reliance has, on numerous occasions, drawn scrutiny and led to allegations that the pursuit of knowledge might be subtly, or overtly, shaped by the interests of its wealthiest patrons. Several high-profile donor relationships have ignited controversy. The substantial contributions from David H. Koch of Koch Industries, including $15 million for the Hall of Human Origins and $35 million for the Dinosaur Hall at the National Museum of Natural History, sparked intense criticism. Given Koch Industries' deep involvement in the fossil fuel sector and its funding of climate change denial efforts, objectors raised concerns that the content of the Hall of Human Origins might downplay the severity of anthropogenic climate change, potentially influenced by its benefactor. Some critics argued the exhibit framed climate change primarily as a natural force driving human ingenuity rather than a contemporary crisis. While the Smithsonian established a broader social impacts committee for the hall to address diverse perspectives on evolution and related societal topics including climate change, the perception of influence due to the Koch funding has persisted. Another stark example of attempted donor influence involved Kenneth Baring, whose donation to the National Museum of American History reportedly came with the absurd contingency that the museum halt multicultural exhibits and instead focus on being an American history museum. This represents a direct attempt by a donor to dictate the curatorial direction and narrative scope of a major national museum. The Sackler family, whose fortune is linked to Purdue Pharma and the opioid crisis through the sale of OxyContin, has also been a source of ethical consternation. While many cultural and educational institutions worldwide have moved to remove the Sackler name from their buildings and programs in response to the family's role in the public health crisis, the Smithsonian has stated its intention not to remove the name from the Arthur M. Sackler Gallery. The institution cites a legally binding contract stipulating naming rights in perpetuity as the reason for its stance. This situation highlights how long-term donor agreements, entered into under different ethical and reputational contexts, can bind an institution to associations that later become deeply problematic, creating an ethical debt for future generations. More recently, Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, made a $200 million donation for a new learning center at the National Air and Space Museum. This gift came with a 50-year naming rights agreement that notably lacks a morals clause, a provision that would allow the Smithsonian to terminate the naming rights if the donor's behavior brought disrepute upon the institution. Critics argue that such long-term agreements without ethical safeguards can discourage future philanthropy and permanently tie the Smithsonian's image to a donor, irrespective of future controversies. The timing of this significant philanthropic announcement, coinciding with a period of public criticism for Bezos regarding a space flight, was also noted as potentially strategic. Corporate sponsorships of specific exhibits have also drawn fire. Mars, Incorporated, a leader-level corporate member, and its sub-brand American Heritage Chocolate, sponsored the Mars Hall of American Business at the National Museum of American History. This exhibit was criticized for presenting an overly celebratory and sanitized view of American capitalism, allegedly downplaying labor struggles and the negative consequences of business practices, particularly given that other sponsors included controversial corporations like Monsanto and Altria, Philip Morris. The perception was that corporate sponsors were effectively allowed to co-author a historical narrative favorable to their interests. Separately, Mars, Incorporated has faced complaints regarding discriminatory hiring practices, reflecting on the broader conduct of a major Smithsonian sponsor. The Smithsonian lists numerous other major corporations as patrons or benefactors, including the Coca-Cola Company, Ford Philanthropy, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, Pfizer Incorporated, and the Walt Disney Company. Each of these entities has its own corporate history and potential for public controversy. For example, Coca-Cola's environmental impact, J.P. Morgan Chase's adjustments to its day programs amidst political pressure, Pfizer's lobbying activities. While direct, provable instances of these specific companies censoring Smithsonian content are not detailed in the provided materials, their significant financial contributions create an environment where concerns about soft censorship or a bias towards donor-friendly narratives are valid. The Smithsonian's own fundraising materials highlight the visibility and consumer exposure offered to corporate partners, a standard practice in sponsorship, but one that can be seen as potentially conflicting with purely educational or critical curatorial objectives. The postponement of a Pride exhibition at the National Museum of African Art in 2025, attributed by the museum to fundraising difficulties amid shifts in the fundraising environment rather than political pressure, nonetheless highlighted the critical role of private donors in funding specific exhibitions. This reliance can make programming vulnerable to the shifting priorities or sensitivities of the donor community. The Smithsonian does have ethics guidelines for its Board of Regents concerning conflicts of interest and personal collecting, and an overarching statement of values and code of ethics that emphasizes public trust and the avoidance of conduct that could compromise institutional integrity. The Office of the Inspector General, OIG, is tasked with investigating allegations of fraud, waste, abuse, and misconduct, including potential conflicts of interest. However, the sheer scale of some donations and the constant need for funding can create a powerful dynamic where the soft power of philanthropy might subtly shape institutional priorities. The desire to maintain good relations with major benefactors could lead to a cautious approach to potentially controversial topics or critical perspectives that might alienate these crucial sources of support. This interplay between public funding, which implies a broad public service mandate, and private influence, which can carry narrower agendas, creates a complex operational and ethical landscape for the Smithsonian. The perpetuity problem associated with some naming rights further complicates this, potentially locking the institution into associations that may not align with future ethical standards or public sentiment. Table 3. Major corporate private donors and associated concerns controversies at the Smithsonian. Pipe donor name corporation pipe area of Smithsonian support pipe notable contribution if public pipe nature of controversy ethical concern pipe Smithsonian responds if any pipe key document hides pipe pipe dash 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 pipe. Pipe David H. Koch, Koch Industries, Pipe Hall of Human Origins, NMH, Dinosaur Hall, NMH, Pipe $15 million, Human Origins, $35 million, Dinosaur Hall, Pipe Donors Ties to Fossil Fuels and Climate Change Denial. Allegations of exhibit downplaying anthropogenic climate change. Pipe Museum states exhibit is science-based. Established Broader Social Impacts Committee. Pipe Kenneth Baring Pipe National Museum of American History Pipe amount not specified pipe donation allegedly contingent on halting multicultural exhibits, demanding focus on an American History Museum. Pipe Secretary accepted donation with this contingency at the time. Pipe Sackler Family, Purdue Pharma, Pipe Arthur M. Sackler Gallery Pipe Original Endowment donations for gallery funding. Pipe Donor Families' role in opioid crisis. Widespread calls for name removal from institutions. Pipe Smithsonian states it will not remove Sackler name due to legally binding perpetual naming rights agreement. Pipe Jeff Bezos, Amazon, Pipe Learning Center at National Air and Space Museum, NISM, Pipe $200 million, Pipe 50-year naming rights deal lacks a morals clause. Concerns about long-term association and big tech influence. Timed announcement around personal controversy. Pipe Smithsonian stated exception to 20-year naming policy due to gift size and facility lifespan. Pipe Mars, Incorporated Pipe Mars Hall of American Business, Mars Chocolate Demonstration Pipe multi-million-dollar donation for Hall Pipe exhibit criticized as overly celebratory of business, downplaying labor issues and negative impacts. Perceived corporate influence on historical narrative. Mars Incorporated faced unrelated civil rights complaints. Pipe exhibit proceeded as planned with corporate sponsorship. Pipe Bill Cosby Pipe Conversations exhibit at National Museum of African Art, MAFA. Pipe $716,000 from the Cosbys. Art from their collection. Pipe exhibit featured was partly about Cosby amidst numerous sexual assault allegations. Pipe exhibit continued with a disclaimer. Decision to avoid harming other artists. Pipe 3. Under Every Rock, Conspiracy Theories and Allegations of Suppressed Knowledge. The Smithsonian Institution, as a preeminent custodian of artifacts and a powerful voice in shaping scientific and historical understanding, has frequently found itself at the center of various conspiracy theories. These narratives often allege the suppression of inconvenient truths, the concealment of anomalous discoveries, and participation in a broad agenda to maintain a particular version of reality. While many of these claims lack credible evidence and are officially debunked by the institution, their persistence speaks to a segment of public distrust and the fascination with the unknown that the Smithsonian, with its vast, largely unseen collections, inadvertently fuels. The Giants in the Earth, deconstructing the Smithsonian giant skeleton cover-up. One of the most enduring and widespread conspiracy theories involving the Smithsonian is the allegation that it discovered, and subsequently destroyed or systematically suppressed, evidence of giant human skeletons. Proponents of this theory claim that thousands of skeletons, some reportedly measuring 7 to over 9 feet in height, were unearthed across North America, particularly from Native American burial mounds in the Mississippi Valley, and then deliberately vanished from the historical record after being sent to the Smithsonian. The motivations attributed to this alleged cover-up are varied but often include a desire to uphold Darwinian evolutionary theory, which, in some interpretations, would be challenged by such anomalous human forms, to maintain a specific narrative of North American prehistory that downplays or misattributes indigenous achievements, or to support agendas related to manifest destiny by erasing evidence of prior, sophisticated non-native populations. Key Smithsonian figures are often implicated by these theories. Major John Wesley Powell, who became director of the Smithsonian's Bureau of Ethnology in 1879, is frequently accused of orchestrating an outright cover-up aligned with a strict pro-evolution, pro-manifest destiny agenda. Under Powell's direction, Cyrus Thomas headed the Mound Exploration Division. Thomas's comprehensive 1894 report on the mound explorations of the Bureau of Ethnology, concluded that the ancient mounds were, in fact, built by the ancestors of contemporary Native Americans, thereby debunking the popular 19th century myth of a lost white race of mound builders. For conspiracy theorists, this scholarly debunking is reinterpreted as a cornerstone of the suppression effort. Another central figure in the alleged cover-up is Els Hrdlicka, a prominent curator of physical anthropology at the Smithsonian. In 1934, Hrdlicka officially rejected the existence of a race of giants, attributing the numerous reports to hoaxes, misidentification of animal bones, wishful thinking, the will to believe, and the errors of amateur anthropologists unfamiliar with human anatomy. Theorists cast Hrdlicka not as a debunker of pseudoscience, but as a key agent in the suppression of genuine evidence. Specific discoveries cited in these narratives include giant mummies supposedly found in Spirit Cave, Nevada, hundreds of red-haired bog mummies in Florida, the ruins of giant cities, and, most dramatically, a purported megalithic burial complex on Catalina Island, California, allegedly containing over 4,000 skeletons, including remains of kings and queens over 9 feet tall, the evidence for which is claimed to be hidden in restricted access evidence rooms at the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian Institution officially and consistently denies these allegations. It has stated that the giant skeleton cover-up narrative gained widespread modern traction from a 2014 story published by World News Daily Report, a website known for satirical and fabricated news content. The institution maintains that it is not in the practice of destroying artifacts and has actively worked to debunk myths about giant humans. It is true, however, that the Smithsonian's Bureau of Ethnology did amass a very large collection of Native American skeletal remains, over 18,000, prior to the passage of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, and the National Museum of the American Indian Act, NMIA. While these collections are now subject to repatriation efforts and were collected for anthropological study, however problematic by today's standards, their existence could be misinterpreted or selectively cited by proponents of the giant skeleton theory as evidence of a vast, hidden bone collection. The giant skeleton conspiracy theory thrives on a deep-seated skepticism of established scientific and historical narratives, positioning the Smithsonian as a powerful enforcer of an official story designed to suppress inconvenient truths. This theory offers an alternative, often romanticized or biblically consonant, version of the past. The Smithsonian, through the work of figures like Powell and Hrdlicka, was instrumental in professionalizing American anthropology and archaeology, establishing specific historical and evolutionary frameworks. This process necessarily involved debunking popular myths. For individuals whose beliefs were contradicted by these official narratives, the Smithsonian became a natural antagonist. The cover-up claim allows these alternative beliefs to persist by asserting that corroborating evidence does exist but is actively concealed by an agenda-driven institution. The sheer scale of the Smithsonian's collections, the vast majority of which are not on public display, inadvertently provides fertile ground for such speculation about what might be hidden from view. The allure of the suppressed discovery is potent. Many of the 19th century accounts of giant skeletons were indeed hoaxes, misinterpretations of extinct megafauna, or simply sensationalized newspaper stories catering to a public eager for the marvelous. The persistence of these theories, despite scholarly debunking, highlights the enduring power of such narratives and the difficulty in correcting long-standing misinformation, particularly when it resonates with pre-existing biases or a will to believe, as Hrdlicka himself observed. The viral spread of the 2014 satirical article underscores how easily these narratives can be revived and disseminated in the digital age, often finding an audience receptive to claims of institutional malfeasance. The out-of-place artifacts, or parts, the Kensington Runstone, crystal skulls, and the boundaries of accepted history. Out-of-place artifacts, or parts, are objects of historical, archaeological, or paleontological interest that are claimed to have been discovered in contexts that challenge conventional understandings of historical chronology, technological development, or human presence. These items are often cited by proponents of alternative historical theories, including ancient astronauts, lost advanced civilizations, or pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, as evidence that mainstream science is overlooking or suppressing crucial data. While the Smithsonian is not directly implicated in suppressing all OPART claims, its role as a leading scientific and historical institution often places it in the position of evaluating, and sometimes debunking, such artifacts. The Kensington Runstone, for example, is a stone slab found in Minnesota in 1898, bearing runic inscriptions that purport to be a record left by Scandinavian explorers in 1362. While a dedicated local community and a museum in Alexandria, Minnesota, maintain its authenticity, the overwhelming scholarly consensus among linguists and historians is that the Runstone is a 19th-century forgery. The Smithsonian's direct involvement with the Runstone is not detailed in the provided materials, but the artifact exemplifies the type of claim that challenges mainstream historical narratives and where institutional pronouncements on authenticity carry significant weight. A more direct engagement by the Smithsonian involves crystal skulls. These are human skull sculptures carved from quartz, often claimed to be ancient Mesoamerican artifacts of Aztec, Maya, or other pre-Columbian origins. In 1992, the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History received a large crystal skull by mail, accompanied by an unsigned letter claiming it was an Aztec artifact purchased in Mexico in 1960. This acquisition prompted extensive research by Smithsonian anthropologist Jane Walsh, in collaboration with colleagues at the British Museum. Their scientific analyses, focusing on tool marks and carving techniques, concluded that none of the famous crystal skulls, including the Smithsonian's, were authentically pre-Columbian. Instead, they were likely manufactured in the mid-19th century or later, probably in Europe or Mexico, using modern lapidary tools. The Smithsonian subsequently presented these findings in an exhibition titled The Truth About Crystal Skulls, actively debunking the myths surrounding these objects. This case demonstrates the Smithsonian engaging in rigorous scientific inquiry to demystify a new OPART, rather than suppressing information about it. Other OPARTs sometimes mentioned in fringe literature include the Antikythera mechanism, the Voynich manuscript, the Perry Wise map, and the Bygone pipes, as well as the Baghdad battery and the Dorchester pot. The Smithsonian's specific involvement with each of these is not detailed, but they represent the broader category of artifacts that fuel debate. General accusations persist that the Smithsonian has suppressed evidence of pre-Columbian explorations or other anomalous finds, such as the alleged discovery of large wooden coffins in Crumph Cave, Alabama, which were supposedly taken to the Smithsonian and then made inaccessible with claims of asbestos contamination in the storage facility. The Smithsonian's scientific and historical expertise inevitably positions it as an arbiter of authenticity regarding such claims. When the institution, through rigorous investigation, debunks a cherished mystery like that of the crystal skulls, this can be perceived by proponents of alternative theories not as sound science, but as an act of suppression or institutional closed-mindedness. The Smithsonian is thus caught in a difficult position. Its mandate for the increase and diffusion of knowledge requires critical evaluation of evidence, which often means refuting unsubstantiated claims. However, this very process can reinforce its image among some as a gatekeeper of orthodoxy, unwilling to entertain possibilities that lie outside established paradigms. See the Hidden Archives, What Lies Beyond Public View and Why? A significant factor fueling speculation about suppressed knowledge at the Smithsonian is the sheer scale of its collections, over 155 million artifacts and specimens, the vast majority of which are not, and cannot be, on public display at any given time. The National Museum of Natural History alone stores approximately 138 million objects, yet only about 21% of its collection data was computerized as of its latest policy statements. While the Smithsonian's online collection search center provides access to millions of records, it explicitly notes that it does not yet include all items from major museums like the National Museum of American History or the National Museum of Natural History. The official and practical reasons for this vast off-display collection are numerous and rooted in standard museum practice. Asterisk collections management and preservation. Artifacts are rotated to prevent damage from prolonged exposure to light and other environmental factors. Long-term conservation often requires specialized storage conditions. The Smithsonian has detailed declarations on maintaining optimal preservation environments, involving careful control of temperature, humidity, and air quality. Research needs. The collections are held in trust for scholarly research by Smithsonian staff and visiting researchers worldwide. The institution emphasizes that it collects specimens so that scientists decades or even centuries from now will have access to the biodiversity and material culture of our time, potentially for research questions not yet conceived. Access to certain collections or data may be temporarily restricted due to ongoing research projects. Resource limitations. The enormous size of the collections and financial constraints mean that not all data can be immediately digitized or all objects prepared for exhibition. Sensitivity and security. Access to some items or their associated data may be restricted due to cultural sensitivity, especially for indigenous materials. Privacy concerns related to donors or subjects, personal data, confidential proprietary information, intellectual property rights, or security risks associated with high-value items or sensitive localities, for example, sites of endangered species. Physical space. The primary storage facilities for the Smithsonian are located in Suitland, Maryland, not in mythical vaults beneath the National Mall, as sometimes depicted in popular culture. Despite these legitimate reasons, the existence of such vast hidden archives provides fertile ground for conspiracy theories. Narratives alleging the suppression of giant skeletons, for instance, often claim the evidence is concealed within these off-view storage areas. The simple fact that most of the collection is unseen by the public creates an information vacuum that can be filled with speculation. This archive fever, a fascination with what might be concealed, is less about deliberate institutional malfeasance and more a reflection of how the unknown can be imbued with extraordinary possibilities, especially when coupled with a pre-existing distrust of authoritative institutions. Furthermore, the Smithsonian's dual mandate for the diffusion of knowledge, implying public access, and its responsibilities for preservation and research, implying controlled access, creates an inherent tension. Decisions about what to exhibit, what to digitize with limited resources, and what to restrict are not purely logistical. They involve curatorial judgments and the setting of institutional priorities. These choices, while often necessary, can be questioned or interpreted by skeptics as biased or as attempts to control the narrative by limiting access to potentially challenging or anomalous materials. The process of deciding which 21% of the National Museum of Natural History's collection data gets computerized, for example, inevitably reflects institutional priorities that may not align with every public interest or alternative research agenda. Whispers of the unexplained, UFOs, ancient technology, and institutional silence. Beyond specific artifact controversies, the Smithsonian is sometimes drawn into broader conspiracy theories concerning UFOs, suppressed evidence of ancient advanced technologies, and a general institutional unwillingness to engage with phenomena that fall outside mainstream scientific paradigms. While direct accusations against the Smithsonian for covering up UFOs are not prominent in the provided materials, its status as a premier national scientific institution makes it a symbolic component of the establishment that such theories often target. Narratives involving ancient astronauts or lost supercivilizations possessing technologies far beyond their accepted historical period frequently intersect with theories about UFO parts and can sometimes carry racialized undertones, such as discredited ideas of Aryan-looking aliens bestowing knowledge upon primitive peoples. The Smithsonian's historical role in debunking the myth of a lost white race of mound builders places it in opposition to such diffusionist theories that seek to attribute significant ancient American achievements to external, often European or advanced, origins. More directly, the Smithsonian has been accused of suppressing evidence of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact or other anomalous archaeological findings that would disrupt conventional historical timelines. The institution actively debunks certain specific claims of suppressed discoveries, such as the myth of Smithsonian-led expeditions finding Egyptian ruins in the Grand Canyon or conducting research related to Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat. In its role of upholding scientific and historical rigor, the Smithsonian often finds itself positioned against these fringe theories. This stance, while scientifically justifiable from the institution's perspective, is frequently interpreted by proponents of such theories not as a commitment to evidence-based knowledge, but as active suppression or participation in a broader conspiracy to hide inconvenient truths. The Smithsonian's general silence on topics it deems pseudoscientific, or its outright debunking of specific claims, can reinforce its image among believers as a dogmatic gatekeeper of orthodoxy, rather than an open-minded institution willing to explore all possibilities. This dynamic highlights the difficult position of a national institution tasked with the diffusion of knowledge when faced with claims that lack credible scientific or historical support but command significant public interest or belief. Table 4, Summary of Prominent Suppressed Knowledge Theories and Smithsonian Stance. Pipe Theory Allegation Pipe Court Claim Pipe Alleged Smithsonian Role Pipe Official Smithsonian Response Evidence Pipe Key Document IDS Pipe Pipe Dash 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 Pipe Pipe Giant Skeleton Cover-Up Pipe Smithsonian discovered and systematically destroyed hit thousands of giant human skeletons. Pipe Key Figures Powell, Hrdlicka, orchestrated cover-up to protect evolutionary theory manifest destiny. Evidence hidden in restricted archives. Pipe officially denies. States theory originated from satirical website. Actively debunks giant human myth. Not in business of destroying artifacts. Acknowledges large collection of normal-sized Native American remains. Pipe Egyptian ruins in Grand Canyon. Smithsonian expeditions found evidence of an ancient Egyptian or Oriental civilization in the Grand Canyon. Financed expeditions and suppressed findings. No record of such expeditions. Denies involvement. Debunks as a hoax originating from a 1909 newspaper article. Noah's Ark research / Mount Ararat. Smithsonian conducted archaeological work on Mount Ararat related to Noah's Ark. Suppressed findings or participated in research. Denies ever conducting archaeological work on Mount Ararat. Crystal skulls. Pre-Columbian origin. Crystal skulls are authentic pre-Columbian Mesoamerican artifacts with mystical properties. Initially, potential acceptance. Later, participation in debunking. Scientific research by Smithsonian's Jane Walsh and others concluded skulls are modern, 19th or later, fabrications based on tool mark analysis. Exhibited findings to debunk myths. Suppression of pre-Columbian contact evidence / anomalous artifacts. General. Smithsonian actively suppresses artifacts that prove pre-Columbian transoceanic voyages or other unconventional historical events, for example, Crumph cave coffins. Hiding artifacts, denying access, discrediting alternative theories. Generally upholds conventional historical timelines based on available evidence. Specific claims like Crumph cave coffins met with logistical explanations, asbestos, items being troughs. UFO cover-up. General theory. Governments, including the U.S., are suppressing evidence of UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence. Implied by some theorists as a major scientific institution, would be part of any such cover-up. No specific Smithsonian statement on UFOs in snippets, but generally aligns with mainstream scientific skepticism towards unsubstantiated claims. General theory. See not named. IV. The Smithsonian's web, structure, connections, and clandestine undercurrents. The Smithsonian Institution's formal structure is an independent federal trust instrumentality governed by a board of regents with significant ties to governmental and corporate power, alongside documented historical collaborations with state entities, creates a complex web of influence. This structure, while providing stability and resources, also opens avenues for scrutiny regarding potential conflicts of interest, elite consensus building, and the blurring of lines between independent scholarship and state-aligned objectives. A governance and power, the Board of Regents, corporate interlocks, and potential conflicts of interest. The ultimate governing authority of the Smithsonian rests with its Board of Regents. This body is composed of the Chief Justice of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, 3 members of the U.S. Senate, 3 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, and 9 citizen regents appointed by a joint resolution of Congress for 6-year terms. This board holds fiduciary responsibility and oversees the administration of the institution, meeting at least 4 times annually. The citizen regents, in particular, often hail from the highest echelons of the corporate, financial, and philanthropic worlds, bringing with them extensive networks and, potentially, the perspectives and interests of those sectors. Examination of regent affiliations based on available, sometimes dated, information from the provided documents reveals significant corporate interlocks. David M. Rubenstein, past chair, co-founder of the Carlyle Group, a major private equity firm. His extensive philanthropic contributions to the Smithsonian, National Zoo, MAAT, National Gallery of Art, National Air and Space Museum are notable, alongside leadership roles at the Council on Foreign Relations and the Economic Club of Washington. Steve M. Case, past chair vice chair, co-founder of America Online, AOL, and current chairman CEO of Revolution, an investment firm. He has been influential in shaping government policy on entrepreneurship and technology. Barbara M. Barrett, past vice chair, former secretary of the U.S. Air Force, with past and present board memberships including the Aerospace Corporation, RAND Corporation, Caltech, overseeing NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and formerly Raytheon. John Fahey, former CEO and chairman of the National Geographic Society, and a board member of Johnson Outdoors Incorporated. Roger W. Ferguson Jr., currently CIO of Red Cell Partners, former vice chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, and past president CEO of TIA. His corporate board memberships include Alphabet Incorporated, Google's parent company, General Mills, and International Flavors and Fragrances. Michael Govan, director of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, LACMA, serving on several Smithsonian Regent committees including Compensation and Human Resources, Facilities, and Strategy, Innovation, and Technology. Risa J. Lavizo Murray, past chair vice chair, president emerita of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Her extensive corporate board service includes Intel, Merck, and formerly General Electric and Hess Corporation. She is also a trustee of TIA and the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Michael M. Linton, Chairman of Snap Incorporated, Warner Music Group, and Schrödinger Incorporated. He previously served as CEO of Sony Entertainment, CEO of AOL Europe, and President of Time Warner International. He is also a director of Ares Management Corporation and a member of the Rand Corporation and the Tate boards. * John W. McCarter Jr., term expired 2020, President Emeritus of the Field Museum, with a career including senior roles at Booz Allen and Hamilton and DeKalb Corporation, and past directorship at W. Grainger Incorporated. The Smithsonian has established ethics guidelines and conflict of interest policies for its regents, mandating disclosure of relevant personal or family interests and recusal from voting on matters where an actual or potential conflict exists. Regents are also prohibited from knowingly competing with the Smithsonian for the acquisition of objects. However, historic instances of governance breakdowns, such as the controversy surrounding a former secretary's compensation and expenses in 2007 which led to his resignation, prompted reforms and ongoing scrutiny by bodies like the Government Accountability Office, GAO. The concentration of individuals with such powerful corporate, financial, and governmental, including defense and intelligence-linked organizations like the Rand Corporation and Aerospace Corporation, affiliations on the Board of Regents raises questions about the potential for an elite consensus to shape the Smithsonian's strategic direction. While these regents undoubtedly bring valuable expertise, fundraising capabilities, and managerial experience, their embeddedness in specific power structures could subtly influence institutional priorities, funding decisions, and the general tolerance for controversial or critical content. This is not to suggest overt malfeasance, but rather the possibility of a narrowed institutional worldview or an unconscious bias towards perspectives that align with dominant corporate and political interests. The early, albeit different, controversy involving Secretary Joseph Henry and Samuel F. B. Morse over telegraph patents illustrates how regents' external interests can become entangled with Smithsonian affairs. The true darker aspect may lie not in isolated scandals, but in the systemic question of how such concentrated influence is wielded and whether existing ethics policies are sufficient to ensure that the public trust mission remains paramount. Table 5, Selected Smithsonian Citizen Regents and Key Affiliations, c. 2014 to 2025, based on available data. Pipe Regent Name Pipe Approx. Term on board, if available. Pipe Key Corporate Affiliations, during or around term. Pipe Key Nonprofit Government Affiliations, during or around term. Pipe Notable Smithsonian Donations Roles, if any. Pipe Key Document Hides Pipe Pipe dash 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 Pipe. Pipe David M. Rubenstein Pipe 2009 to 2021, Chair 2021, Pipe The Carlyle Group, Co-Founder, Pipe Council on Foreign Relations, Chair, Economic Club of D.C., Chair, Duke University. FMR Chair, National Gallery of Art, Chair, Pipe Major Donor, Zoo, Ma'at, Nism. Chair of Board Pipe Steve M. Case Pipe Vice Chair, Chair Pipe America Online, Co-Founder, FMR CEO, Revolution, Chairman CEO, Pipe Case Foundation, Chairman. Startup America Partnership, FMR Chair, NACI, Co-Chair, Pipe Chair of Board Pipe Barbara M. Barrett Pipe Vice Chair Pipe Aerospace Corporation, Chair, Valley Bank of Arizona, FMR Founding Chair, Raytheon, FMR Board, Pipe FMR. Secretary of the Air Force, Caltech, Vice Chair, overseeing JPL, Rand Corporation, Board, Pipe Vice Chair of Board Pipe John Fahey Pipe appointed 2014 Pipe Johnson Outdoors Incorporated, Board, Pipe National Geographic Society, FMR CEO, current Chairman, Pipe Member, NM&H Board Pipe Roger W. Ferguson Jr. Pipe current Pipe Alphabet Incorporated, Board, General Mills Incorporated, Board, International Flavors and Fragrances Incorporated, Board, Red Cell Partners, CIO, TIA, FMR Press CEO, Swiss Re, FMR Headfin. Services, McKinsey, FMR Partner, Pipe FMR. Vice Chairman, U.S. Federal Reserve. Council on Foreign Relations Pipe Regent Pipe Michael Govan Pipe current Pipe, Director, LACMA, Pipe, Director, LACMA, Pipe Regent. Chair Member of multiple Regent Committees Pipe Risa J. Laviso Murray Pipe current Pipe Intel, Board, Merck & Company. Board, GE Healthcare Tech. Board, Better Therapeutics, Board, FMR, General Electric, Genworth, Beckman Coulter, Hess Corporation Pipe Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, President. Emerita, University of Pennsylvania, Professor Emerita, TIA, Board, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Trustee, Pipe Chair Vice Chair of Board Pipe Michael M. Linton Pipe appointed 2014 Pipe Snap Incorporated, Chairman, Warner Music Group, Chairman, Schrödinger Incorporated, Chairman, Ares Management Corporation, Director, FMR, Sony Entertainment, CEO, AOL Europe, CEO, Penguin Group, CEO, Pipe Rand Corporation, Member, Tate, Board, Pipe Regent Pipe John W. McCarter Jr. Pipe term expired March 2020 Pipe FMR, Booz Allen and Hamilton, SVP, DeKalb Corporation, Press CEO, W. W. Granger Incorporated, Director, Pipe the Field Museum, President. Emeritus, Life Trustee, University of Chicago. Emeritus Trustee, Pipe FMR. Chair of Board. Opened Ma'at during chairmanship by Pipe B. The institution and the state, alleged intelligence collaborations and abstract actions. The Smithsonian's unique positioning as a quasi-governmental entity, reliant on federal funding and subject to congressional oversight, inherently creates a close, if sometimes ambiguous, relationship with the U.S. government. This proximity has led to documented collaborations with state agencies and fueled speculation about less transparent or even clandestine engagements, particularly during periods of heightened national security concern. One documented instance of direct collaboration with military research interests was the Manpower Research and Advisory Services (MRAS) program, which operated within the Smithsonian from approximately 1971 to 1994. This initiative, stemming from the interests of former Smithsonian Secretary Leonard Carmichael in military manpower issues, held contracts with the U.S. Navy's Office of Naval Research (ONR). The MRAS was primarily concerned with analyzing and defining personnel challenges associated with the Navy's transition to an all-volunteer force. Its activities included organizing conferences and symposiums on topics such as the effectiveness of recruitment advertising and innovative methods for measuring morale. While the research itself might appear benign, the program represents a clear example of the Smithsonian's resources and expertise being directly applied to serve the strategic objectives of a branch of the U.S. Armed Forces. This type of engagement can be considered an abstract action, where the institution's mission of knowledge diffusion is channeled towards specific, state-defined problems, subtly blurring the lines between independent scholarly inquiry and government service. The Smithsonian also has connections, primarily through archival holdings and regent affiliations, with the RAND Corporation. RAND, which originated as a U.S. Air Force project in 1945 before becoming an independent nonprofit research corporation, focuses heavily on national security and public policy. The Smithsonian's National Museum of American History houses some of RAND's archival collections, and the institution's video history program has documented RAND's significant role in the post-war military-industrial complex and the development of early computing. The presence of RAND-affiliated individuals on the Board of Regents further underscores the Smithsonian's embeddedness within networks of state-aligned knowledge production. While there is no direct evidence in the provided documentation linking the Smithsonian Institution to covert intelligence operations like the FBI's COINTELPRO program, which ran from 1956 to 1971 to surveil, discredit, and disrupt domestic political organizations deemed subversive, the historical context of the Cold War is relevant. During this period, there were instances where anthropological fieldwork and academic research intersected with the needs of intelligence agencies, sometimes involving the use of scholarly work without permission, or even the use of fieldwork as a cover for espionage. This broader historical backdrop, coupled with the Smithsonian's close ties to the federal government through its governance and funding, creates a space for speculation among those inclined to distrust institutional narratives about other, less visible forms of collaboration or co-optation. The permeable boundary between an independent institution and the state apparatus it serves makes the potential for such engagements a darker aspect, worthy of critical consideration, even in the absence of definitive proof of sinister clandestine activities. See Scientific Racism and Eugenics, Beyond Herdlicka, a deeper institutional reckoning. The shadow of scientific racism and eugenic thought looms large over the Smithsonian's history, primarily, but not exclusively, through the work and collections of Ales Herdlicka. As curator of physical anthropology from 1904 to 1941, Herdlicka was a central figure in the effort to establish biological hierarchies among human races, a pursuit deeply embedded in the flawed scientific paradigms of his era. He meticulously measured and collected human remains, particularly skulls and brains, believing these somatic features could objectively delineate racial boundaries and confirm theories of white superiority. His methods were often exploitative, with remains acquired from marginalized communities, including Native Americans and black individuals, frequently without consent from the deceased or their families. The Smithsonian's 2024 Human Remains Task Force report explicitly acknowledges this troubling past, stating, "This is our unfortunate inheritance, a racist legacy that burdens the Smithsonian," and noting that the collection of human remains to support scientific racism has resulted in large collections of people from marginalized communities. Samuel Redman's book, Bone Rooms, further details how systemic institutionalized racism utilized human remains as core content for both research and exhibitions in American museums, with the Smithsonian and figures like Herdlicka playing prominent roles. While Herdlicka is the most frequently cited Smithsonian figure in connection with these practices, it is crucial to understand that his work occurred within a broader societal and scientific milieu that largely embraced eugenic principles. The eugenics movement in the United States during the early to mid-20th century led to legally mandated sterilizations of those deemed unfit and discriminatory immigration policies, all justified by flawed scientific theories of heredity and racial purity. Although the provided documents do not directly link other specific Smithsonian programs or personnel beyond Herdlicka's collecting activities to the operationalization of eugenic policies like forced sterilization, The institution's scientific research on race was undeniably situated within this pervasive intellectual climate. Hrdlicka was not an isolated ideologue, but a highly influential curator operating with the support and resources of a premier national institution. The Smithsonian, by providing him a platform, funding his expeditions, and housing the vast collections he amassed, was complicit in the increase and diffusion of knowledge that was, in this domain, profoundly racist and ethically indefensible by modern standards. This implies an institutional failure of oversight and ethical review during that period. The current efforts to repatriate remains and revise collection policies represent a belated reckoning with this historical complicity. Furthermore, the very act of collecting and classifying human beings according to racial typologies, a cornerstone of Hrdlicka's work, was central to eugenic thought. The vast collections of human remains amassed under this paradigm represent a material legacy of that era. Even if the Smithsonian no longer subscribes to the racist theories that motivated their collection, the challenge lies in delinking these remains and their associated data from their problematic origins. There is a risk that past classifications and research based on these collections could inadvertently perpetuate outdated and harmful racial categorizations, if not handled with extreme care and critical awareness. The Human Remains Task Force report touches upon this complexity, acknowledging that demographic data from remains can serve forensic purposes, while also stating that such work should be generally independent of racial classification, highlighting the nuanced path the institution must navigate. Reconstructing reality, the Smithsonian's role in shaping narratives and public perception. The Smithsonian Institution, by its very mandate and its immense public presence, plays a formidable role in shaping how Americans and the world understand history, science, art, and culture. This power to construct narratives is not neutral. It is inherently political and has been a source of ongoing debate and critique. A nation-building and cultural authority, a critical look at the Smithsonian's influence. From its very inception, the Smithsonian was envisioned as an instrument of nation-building. Its founding purpose, the increase and diffusion of knowledge, was quickly harnessed to the project of developing an American national identity. Early proponents like John Quincy Adams saw the institution as a means to burnish the ideals of the young republic and educate the public. This foundational objective inherently positions the Smithsonian not merely as a passive repository of objects, but as an active agent in shaping a collective understanding of what it means to be American. Academic critiques increasingly analyze how national museums like the Smithsonian function as profoundly political entities whose exhibitions and collections contribute to the construction of national identity, often reinforcing dominant ideologies and narratives. For instance, research into the Smithsonian's archival practices, such as its cataloging systems and use of place names, suggests that these seemingly bureaucratic processes can serve as nation-building tools. By imposing settler colonial terminologies and frameworks, these records can obscure indigenous sovereignty and contribute to the dispossession of indigenous lands, thereby shaping a particular version of U.S. national identity. The Smithsonian wields considerable cultural authority. Public opinion surveys consistently show that museums are among the most trusted sources of information, often perceived as fact-based, objective, and nonpartisan. This high level of trust grants the Smithsonian significant power to influence public perception. However, this authority is not uncontested. Controversies surrounding exhibitions like the Enola Gay or the West as America are essentially struggles over the national narrative. In the Enola Gay case, the Smithsonian's initial attempt to present a multifaceted historical account was met with accusations that it was undermining a heroic national story, leading to a significant retreat by the institution. Such episodes demonstrate the tension between the Smithsonian's role as a scholarly institution and its function as a national symbol expected to uphold certain commemorative or patriotic ideals. Recent attempts by political administrations to directly influence the Smithsonian's content, such as the Trump administration's executive orders decrying divisive, race-centered ideology and calling for a more uplifting and patriotic portrayal of American history, further highlight the contested nature of its narrative-shaping role. Historians and cultural critics often defend the Smithsonian's efforts to explore complex and sometimes uncomfortable aspects of the past, arguing that understanding national imperfections is crucial for shaping a better future, and that the goal of historical inquiry is understanding, not necessarily celebration or uncritical veneration. Drawing on theories of nationalism articulated by scholars like Benedict Anderson and Eric Hobsbawm, the Smithsonian can be seen as a key institution in the creation and maintenance of imagined communities and invented traditions that underpin national identity. The selection of what to collect, preserve, and exhibit is an active process of curating a national memory. This process inherently involves choices that emphasize certain stories, heroes, and values while downplaying or excluding others, often reflecting the perspectives of the dominant culture or the state at a given time. The very act of cataloging and naming, as seen in the analysis of anthropological records, participates in this construction of a national narrative. This leads to a paradox. The public invests immense trust in the Smithsonian as an objective source, yet the institution is a constant site of ideological struggle over the stories it tells. This suggests either that a segment of the public is unaware of the inherent politics of museum representation, or that different public factions have deeply conflicting expectations of the truth the Smithsonian should present. The finding that communities of color often trust museums less, perceiving their histories as misrepresented, further complicates any notion of a universally accepted or trusted national narrative emanating from the institution. The Smithsonian's cultural authority is therefore both powerful and perpetually under negotiation. Be the politics of representation and the construction of otherness. Quotes. A significant and troubling dimension of the Smithsonian's history and operations concerns its representation of marginalized communities, particularly indigenous peoples and people of color. Academic critiques argue that museums, including the Smithsonian, have historically played a role in the construction of otherness, a process by which certain groups are defined as fundamentally different from, and often inferior to, a dominant cultural norm, typically Western and white. This has profound implications for how these communities are understood and how their cultural heritage is treated. The colonial origins of many museum collections, including parts of the Smithsonian's, are deeply problematic. Anthropological and ethnographic collections, in particular, were often amassed during periods of colonial expansion, and the act of collecting, classifying, and displaying objects and even human remains from colonized peoples was itself an exercise of power. Early ethnographic exhibitions frequently presented non-Western cultures as primitive, exotic, or static, serving to reinforce colonial hierarchies and the supposed superiority of Western civilization. The very distinction between art history for Western objects and anthropology for non-Western objects has been criticized as a mechanism that exoticizes and diminishes the artistic achievements of other cultures. The Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, for example, has been analyzed for how its displays of Asian and African material, much of which was acquired through colonial networks, reflected and sometimes reinforced imperial ideologies, even as curators navigated the complexities of decolonization in the mid-20th century. Claire Wintel's work, Decolonizing the Smithsonian, examines how curators like Eugene Nez and Gordon D. Gibson constructed narratives that, while sometimes attempting to incorporate post-colonial perspectives, could also perpetuate stereotypes or serve U.S. Cold War interests by presenting certain newly independent nations in particular ways. The representation of Native Americans has been a particularly fraught area. For decades, Native cultures were often portrayed as vanishing or as historical relics, their objects displayed without adequate consultation or context provided by the communities themselves. The establishment of the National Museum of the American Indian, NMI, in 2004, with its emphasis on Native voice and perspective, represented a significant attempt to redress these historical misrepresentations. However, even NMI has faced criticism from within Native communities regarding its curatorial choices, the extent of true community collaboration, and whether it adequately confronts the historical trauma of genocide and colonialism. Jackie Thompson Rand, for instance, critiqued NMI's early decision to eschew the historical context of genocide and colonialism, arguing that this perpetuated an erasure of authentic Native histories. More contemporary controversies, such as the alleged silent cleansing of works by diverse artists or the misrepresentation of queer themes in the work of artists like Felix González Torres, suggest that the politics of representation remain a live issue. These instances point to a potential institutional tendency to filter challenging narratives through the desires of a perceived mainstream or powerful audience, thereby diluting or erasing the experiences of marginalized groups. The very act of curating, choosing what to display, how to label it, and what stories to tell, is an exercise in power that defines cultural significance and can perpetuate systems of oppression if not approached with critical self-awareness and a genuine commitment to inclusivity. The Smithsonian's efforts to address these issues, such as the ethical returns policy, the work of the Human Remains Task Force, and initiatives like the Bias Inside Us exhibit, indicate an institutional awareness of these problematic legacies. However, the depth of historical bias and the ongoing power dynamics involved in representation mean that achieving truly equitable and decolonized museum practice is a continuous struggle rather than a settled outcome. The critique from marginalized communities often centers on the need for genuine power sharing and autonomy in telling their own stories, rather than simply being included within existing institutional frameworks. See knowledge production, gatekeeping, and ideological influence, the Smithsonian as a disciplinary force. Beyond its role as a public showcase, the Smithsonian is a formidable research institution and a significant publisher of scholarly work, particularly through the Smithsonian Institution Scholarly Press, SISP. This capacity for knowledge production, coupled with its cultural authority, positions the Smithsonian as a powerful gatekeeper, influencing not only public understanding, but also the direction and validation of academic disciplines. Michel Foucault's theories on power knowledge are particularly relevant here. Foucault argued that knowledge and power are inextricably linked. Institutions like museums and research centers do not merely discover or disseminate neutral knowledge, but actively participate in its construction, shaping what counts as truth within specific discourses and historical contexts. The Smithsonian, by its very nature, establishes and reinforces regimes of truth in fields like anthropology, archaeology, natural history, and American history. Its research priorities, funding allocations for scientific projects, collections strategies, and publication choices all contribute to defining the legitimate boundaries and accepted methodologies within these disciplines. The Smithsonian's historical involvement in scientific racism, particularly through the work of Ailes Hrdlicka and the collection of human remains to support racial typologies, serves as a stark example of how the institution's knowledge production was once aligned with deeply problematic ideologies. By lending its institutional weight to such science, the Smithsonian helped legitimize theories that had devastating social and political consequences. The current efforts to reckon with this past involve not just the physical return of remains but also a critical reevaluation of the epistemic foundations upon which that knowledge was built. The concept of canon formation is also pertinent. The Smithsonian, through its exhibitions and publications, plays a role in deciding which artists, historical events, scientific theories, and cultural narratives are deemed significant and worthy of national recognition and preservation. This process of selection and emphasis inevitably involves exclusion and can reflect prevailing biases related to race, gender, class, and ideology. For instance, the historical underrepresentation of women artists or the contributions of marginalized communities in national historical narratives, which the Smithsonian is now actively trying to address through initiatives like the American Women's History Museum and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, points to past gatekeeping practices that shaped a skewed historical canon. Accusations of ideological influence, particularly in recent years, further highlight the Smithsonian's role as a site of contested knowledge production. The Trump administration's executive orders, for example, directly challenged the Smithsonian's historical and scientific interpretations, accusing them of being driven by a divisive, race-centered ideology rather than objective facts. These orders sought to impose a particular ideological framework on the institution's research and exhibitions, effectively attempting to control the knowledge it produces and diffuses. The American Historical Association and other scholarly bodies defended the Smithsonian's work as being based on evidence and critical inquiry, arguing that historical understanding evolves and is not about promoting a single, unchanging patriotic narrative. The Smithsonian's own internal guidelines for interpretive writing in exhibitions acknowledge the need to connect emotionally and intellectually with diverse visitors and to comply with plain language requirements. However, the very process of creating exhibition narratives involves making choices about what stories to tell, whose voices to include, and how to frame complex issues for a broad public. These choices are inevitably influenced by curatorial expertise, institutional priorities, and, as discussed previously, potential external pressures from funders or political actors. The Smithsonian's Guide to Interpretive Writing for Exhibitions itself notes that each museum within the institution has its own idiosyncrasies of style, subject matter, and processes, suggesting that knowledge construction is not monolithic even within the broader Smithsonian umbrella. Thus, the Smithsonian functions as a powerful disciplinary institution, shaping not only public understanding but also the very fields of knowledge it engages with. Its epistemic authority is significant, but it is also a site of ongoing struggle, where dominant paradigms are challenged, and the power to define knowledge and truth is constantly negotiated. 6. The Unseen Hand, Abstract Actions and Sinister Obscurities. Beyond overt controversies and documented connections, the sheer scale, influence, and unique quasi-governmental status of the Smithsonian Institution give rise to questions about more subtle, abstract actions and the potential for sinister obscurities in its operations and impact. These concerns often lie in the realm of unstated agendas, systemic biases, and the less visible ways in which such a powerful institution might shape society. The Smithsonian as a disciplinary institution, shaping fields of knowledge. The Smithsonian's role extends beyond simply housing collections. It actively shapes the disciplines it encompasses, such as anthropology, archaeology, art history, and natural sciences. Through its research programs, publications like the Smithsonian Contribution Series and open monographs from SISP, fellowship opportunities, and the very act of classifying and interpreting its vast holdings, the institution helps to define what constitutes valid knowledge, research methodologies, and areas of focus within these fields. This disciplinary power can have far-reaching consequences. Historically, as seen with the institutional support for racial science, this power was used to legitimize deeply flawed and harmful ideologies. While the institution now strives for a more ethical and inclusive scholarship, its historical weight and ongoing influence mean that its current research priorities and interpretations continue to shape academic discourse. The decision of what research to fund, which scholars to support, and what findings to publish through its press inevitably involves a degree of gatekeeping that influences the trajectory of knowledge in these domains. The shift towards collections-based research in archaeology, partly driven by evolving ethical standards and funding realities, is an example of how institutional practices, including those at major repositories like the Smithsonian, can redirect disciplinary trends. Influence on policy and public discourse, the soft power of a national icon. The Smithsonian wields significant soft power, the ability to influence through attraction and persuasion rather than coercion. As a globally recognized symbol of American culture, science, and learning, its exhibitions, educational programs, and research findings contribute to shaping public discourse on a wide range of issues, from climate change and evolution to national history and identity. This influence can extend to policy making, as its research is sometimes used to inform governmental decisions or address national priorities. For example, the Manpower Research and Advisory Services for the Navy. Its role in biodiversity conservation and environmental research. The Smithsonian's engagement in cultural diplomacy, even if not always explicitly framed as such, projects American values and perspectives internationally. The abstract action here is the subtle yet pervasive way the institution helps to frame public understanding and set agendas for national conversations, often reflecting and reinforcing mainstream or officially sanctioned viewpoints, though it also provides platforms for critical perspectives, leading to the controversies previously discussed. See unstated agendas and ideological undercurrents, reading between the lines. The most sinister obscurities often lie in the realm of unstated agendas and the unseen influences that may shape the Smithsonian's trajectory. Given its reliance on both federal funding and thus political goodwill and substantial private corporate donations, the potential for unstated pressures to align with certain political or economic ideologies is a persistent concern. While direct quid pro quo arrangements compelling specific curatorial decisions are difficult to prove and likely rare, a more subtle influence can manifest. This could take the form of self-censorship by curators wary of offending powerful stakeholders, the prioritization of research and exhibitions that are likely to attract funding or positive political attention, or the framing of sensitive topics in ways that mitigate potential backlash. The dense network of corporate and political elites on its board of regents could foster an environment where certain assumptions and values are taken for granted, subtly guiding the institution's direction in ways that are not explicitly articulated but nevertheless powerful. The darker aspect is not necessarily a conscious conspiracy, but the systemic ways in which power, funding, and ideology can intersect to shape the output of even a public trust institution, potentially leading to the marginalization of dissenting voices or inconvenient truths without overt directives. The very structure of the Smithsonian as a public-private entity operating at the heart of the nation's capital makes it a focal point for these complex and often opaque influences. 7. Public perception and trust in a contested era. The Smithsonian Institution has historically enjoyed a high degree of public trust. Surveys conducted by organizations like the American Alliance of Museums, have indicated that the public considers museums, including by implication national institutions like the Smithsonian, to be among the most reliable sources of historical information, often more so than books, teachers, or even personal accounts by relatives. Reasons cited for this trust include perceptions that museums are fact-based, present real authentic original objects, and are research-oriented. Furthermore, a significant majority of Americans, 97%, believe museums are educational assets, and support for federal funding for museums is generally strong across the political spectrum. However, this foundation of trust is not monolithic and has faced challenges, particularly in recent years amidst heightened political polarization and specific controversies. While general confidence in scientists remains relatively high compared to other groups like elected officials or journalists, 76% expressing a great deal or fair amount of confidence in scientists in a 2024 Pew Research Center survey, this trust saw a decline during the COVID-19 pandemic and has only partially recovered. Specific polling data directly measuring public trust in the Smithsonian Institution after major recent controversies like the racial brain collection revelations or the Trump administration's executive orders is not extensively detailed in the provided snippets. However, some data points suggest potential vulnerabilities. The 2021 survey, while showing overall high trust, also found that households comprised of only white people were far more likely to trust museums than households with people of color, with the latter often feeling their histories are grossly misrepresented. This indicates that trust is not universally shared and is impacted by perceptions of representational fairness. The controversies surrounding the Smithsonian's handling of Native American remains and the racial brain collection could reasonably be expected to affect trust levels within those communities and among the broader public concerned with ethical institutional practices. The public apology by Secretary Lonnie Bunch regarding the brain collection was an attempt to address this damage. The highly politicized attacks on the Smithsonian's exhibits during the Trump administration, accusing the institution of promoting divisive, race-centered ideology, likely had an impact on public perception, potentially eroding trust among those who agreed with the criticisms, while perhaps galvanizing support among those who saw the attacks as unwarranted political interference. The media framing of these controversies plays a significant role in shaping public opinion. For instance, the Enola Gay controversy was intensely covered, and public opinion polls at the time reflected the deep divisions it caused. While specific post-2020 polling on Smithsonian trust is sparse in the snippets, the general decline in trust in governmental institutions and the increased scrutiny of cultural institutions suggest that the Smithsonian's public standing is a dynamic and potentially fragile asset. The institution's own audience research and visitor experience ratings, pre-2020 data showed high satisfaction, are important internal metrics, but broader public trust in its neutrality and integrity in the face of controversy remains a critical area for ongoing assessment. 8. Whistleblowers, internal dissent, and suppressed concerns. The internal workings of any large institution can sometimes harbor disputes, ethical concerns, or allegations of misconduct that may not always reach public view unless brought forth by whistleblowers or through internal investigations. The Smithsonian Institution, with its thousands of employees and complex operations, is not immune to such issues. The Smithsonian's Office of the Inspector General, OIG, is tasked with investigating allegations of waste, fraud, abuse, gross mismanagement, employee and contractor misconduct, and violations of law that impact the institution's programs and operations. The OIG provides a hotline for reporting such concerns and has a process for reviewing complaints, which may lead to internal administrative action, referral for criminal prosecution, or recommendations for systemic improvements. Examples of substantiated cases investigated by the OIG include theft of government property, misuse of equipment, fraudulent travel voucher claims, and violations of Smithsonian standards of conduct by senior employees, sometimes resulting in resignations, suspensions, or restitution. Specific to research, the Smithsonian has a directive, SD 604, outlining procedures for handling allegations of research misconduct, defined as fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism. This policy includes processes for inquiry and investigation, ensuring confidentiality for complainants and respondents where possible, and reporting findings to funding agencies if applicable. One notable publicly reported whistleblower case involved Richard Pullman, a lighting specialist at the National Air and Space Museum, NASM. In 2009, Pullman filed a federal whistleblower claim alleging that the Smithsonian retaliated against him, effectively demoting him for reporting workplace safety violations related to asbestos exposure in the museum. He contended that his work on asbestos-containing walls made him sick with asbestosis. The Smithsonian denied retaliation, but acknowledged that some workers had not been notified about the asbestos found by a consultant in 1992. Pullman's case also alleged that contractors improperly handled asbestos-containing materials, potentially exposing the public. This case followed another successful whistleblower action at NASM, where museum specialist Michael Cross alleged he was fired in retaliation for reporting that ranking officials used the museum's restoration facility for personal projects. Cross was ordered reinstated by the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board in 2007. These documented cases, while not necessarily indicative of widespread suppressed concerns across all Smithsonian museums or research centers, illustrate that mechanisms for internal dissent and reporting exist, but also that employees who raise concerns can face significant personal and professional challenges. The Whistleblower Protection Act, WPA, is designed to protect federal employees, a category that includes many Smithsonian staff due to its federal trust status, from retaliation for disclosing illegality, waste, and corruption. However, the effectiveness of these protections can be debated, and the fear of reprisal may still deter some employees from coming forward. The provided research does not contain widespread allegations of suppressed scientific research findings due to internal dissent or whistleblower actions within specific departments like anthropology, archaeology, or biology beyond the broader historical context of scientific racism previously discussed. However, the potential for such issues to arise in any large research institution exists, making robust whistleblower protection and transparent investigative processes crucial for maintaining ethical standards and public trust. 9. Conclusion: the enduring shadows. The Smithsonian Institution, conceived from an enigmatic act of philanthropy for the increase and diffusion of knowledge, stands as a monumental testament to human curiosity, artistic expression, and scientific endeavor. Yet, beneath its gleaming public facade and within its vast, often unseen collections, lie darker dimensions, complex histories, unresolved ethical burdens, and persistent vulnerabilities that challenge its idealized image as a neutral purveyor of truth. This investigation has traversed several such shadowed realms. The very ambiguity of James Smithson's founding intent created a foundational space for interpretation and, potentially, for the subtle shaping of its mission by subsequent generations and their attendant agendas. The early, fierce debates over accepting his bequest foreshadowed the institution's enduring role as a battleground for defining American national identity, a process inherently fraught with political and ideological struggle. The long history of exhibition controversies, from the Enola Gay and hide-seek to the politically charged atmosphere surrounding content on race and gender in recent years, reveals an institution perennially caught between scholarly independence, public sensitivities, and the potent lever of political and financial pressure. The Smithsonian's unique public-private structure, with its significant reliance on both federal appropriations and private largesse, creates a complex web of accountability and influence. The soft power of major donors and corporate sponsors, sometimes secured through long-term naming rights lacking ethical safeguards, raises persistent questions about the potential for narrative capture and the subtle skewing of the knowledge it diffuses. Perhaps the most profound shadow is cast by the legacy of its collection practices, particularly the acquisition of tens of thousands of human remains. The racial brain collection, amassed by figures like Ailes Herdlicka in the name of a discredited scientific racism, and the vast holdings of Native American ancestral remains often taken under duress or as spoils of colonial expansion, represent a deep ethical wound. While the institution has apologized for past wrongs and implemented policies for repatriation and ethical returns, the slow pace of return and the sheer scale of the task underscore the enduring weight of this unfortunate inheritance. Conspiracy theories, such as the alleged giant skeleton cover-up, thrive in the spaces created by institutional opacity and public distrust. While often lacking credible evidence and officially debunked by the Smithsonian, these narratives highlight a desire for alternative understandings and a suspicion of powerful institutions as gatekeepers of knowledge. The fact that the majority of the Smithsonian's collections remain off display, while a practical necessity, inadvertently fuels such speculation about what might be hidden. The governance of the Smithsonian by a board of regents comprising individuals with extensive corporate and political connections further invites scrutiny regarding potential conflicts of interest and the influence of elite consensus on institutional priorities. Documented collaborations with state entities, such as the U.S. Navy, demonstrate how the institution's resources can be directed towards national strategic interests, blurring the lines of purely independent research. Ultimately, the Smithsonian Institution is not a monolithic entity, but a complex ecosystem of museums, research centers, scholars, and administrators, constantly negotiating its multifaceted mission. Its darker aspects are not necessarily evidence of a singular, sinister agenda, but rather the product of historical complicity in problematic ideologies like scientific racism and colonialism, the inherent vulnerabilities of its funding and governance structures, and the unavoidable politics of representing culture and history in a diverse and often divided society. The institution has demonstrated a capacity for self-reflection and reform, as seen in its recent ethical policies and apologies. However, the true measure of its commitment to confronting these shadows will lie in the sustained, transparent, and equitable implementation of these reforms, particularly in its engagement with marginalized communities whose heritage and ancestors have been most impacted by its past practices. The increase and diffusion of knowledge remains its guiding principle, but the ongoing challenge is to ensure that this pursuit is conducted with unwavering ethical integrity and a profound respect for all human dignity, acknowledging that the stories it tells, and how it tells them, hold immense power in shaping our understanding of ourselves and our world.